Hello, we're back again at the Festival of Work. I'm very excited. We have a special guest with us, which is Dr. Jo Salter MBE. And what Andy and I are excited to delve into is that she has been a pioneer in the aviation and is now working on leadership with different corporate companies. But what really stood out to us is she's the first British female fighter jet pilot. And now you're working in the corporate world and kind of bringing that knowledge into the workplace and kind of helping develop teams. But before I run away with myself, do you mind giving a bit more of an introduction, a bit of a background, if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course, and thank you for inviting me. Yes, spent my youth, I suppose, my 20s, joined the Air Force when I was 18, ended up becoming Britain's first female fighter pilot. Left after I had my first daughter for a number of complex reasons and joined industry, I suppose. Did various jobs, ended up running my own consulting company, worked for the Open University Business School, wrote a couple of books. I've been on the speaking circuit, done a lot of work with high-performing teams and boards about effectiveness of the human being, because especially with all of the technology and software that we see here today, the human being is so critical to success in organisations. Because after all, what drives culture but the human being, the leader, the way people operate within that system?
Definitely interesting. Like you say, technology is a massive influence, but Andy and I spoke about kind of communication and, like say, the importance of the human element. How much of an impact do you think that actually has, the human element? What's the impact that could have on an organisation?
The human is what it's all about, isn't it? Because we often talk about organisations, but organisations are only a sum of the people that are within them. The way we operate, the way we turn up, the experience that we have when we come to work in the morning, the feeling that we have when we get up in the morning, the angst that we have. I always say that the biggest challenge we have in life is getting over ourselves. And all of that angst and all of that feeling are what people turn up with to work.
It's a really interesting point. I hooked on something you said, like the effective, getting the most out of it in effective, performing human. And we talked in a previous video just now about being more human at work, and obviously we talk a lot about tech, we talk about a lot of software. There's loads of discussions today about AI and the advancement. The world of work is changing, right? And it's scary. And I suppose, what's your view on the idea that technology should be here to support humans rather than be replacing and automating? And how do you feel you can get more out of people feeling more human in the workplace to make an impact rather than feeling like an accessory in the workplace? Or authenticity, I suppose, is the way I'm going. How can you be more an authentic human at work, and how do you capture that?
I think the world of work is changing and it's exciting. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I do meet people who think it's scary, and I think other people think it's exciting. Sometimes the unknown feels overwhelming when we start to think about that level of ambiguity about what's coming and what that means to us and how we will be able to work, what we'll be able to do. It's, to me, something really important about how Gen AI, for example, can replace some of the mundane work that we do and therefore give room for us to be more creative and to spend time communicating and being in teams and working together rather than having to fill out spreadsheets or to have to decide which email and feeling overwhelmed because you have 1,000 emails in your inbox, for example. So all of those allow us to be more human if we're then creating and operating together. If you think back to school, what were the days that we loved and enjoyed? They weren't sitting usually at a desk doing something on our own. They were, when we were in a group, creating or making or doing a project where you had to start to be something different and think something different. So all of those are what is about being human. I do, which I'll just throw in here, think that we need to change our whole education system, because actually our education system removes creativity. It makes people focus on structure and passing exams. Look at GCSEs and the marathon that is now for a young person and the pressure that's on them to pass this whole load of GCSEs. Yet what we need in the future is we need people to use AI, because the people who are going to be successful are those who use AI to help enhance their abilities rather than thinking about about it just being a replacement. The human in the AI loop, let's call it.
Well, we talked about that quite a lot, didn't we, earlier this year, Alice, in terms of like the threat of AI. Am I going to lose my job? And it's about recognising that technological advancements enable us to be better humans in a way that the technology can't. It's the unburdening, isn't it? The unburdening of the processes that are distracting us from the sparks of genius that we don't have time to. So, I can completely see where you're going. Like making room for creativity and human behaviour is where it helps.
Definitely. And one of the things I picked on there as well, and you mentioned it earlier, was about efficiencies. So, like you say, we all have kind of a task to do on our day job, or if we go to the education system, we know that we have to get through the GCSE season. But I just wondered, in terms of efficiency, how is that? Do you incorporate that when you're speaking about leadership styles and about high-performing teams? Is that a running theme that comes up?
It actually isn't one that I have been talking about, but we do with my sister. We often talk about the tax on inefficiency, the tax on not having time to deal with something and popping it away in a drawer or thinking I'll deal with that later, and then when you come back to it having to revisit it and think about it. So again, if AI or some form of technology can be helping us do all of that, then we are again releasing time for thought, for that creativity piece that we were discussing already.
You have a wealth of experience as a leader in various contexts with teams. How are you able to utilise the experience you have in different industries, say the forces, and apply those approaches into a business context and see the opportunities for effective leadership or teamwork there?
I think there's sort of numerous things, aren't there? There's something about self-awareness, about understanding the impact that you are having on others. And that impact can change depending on the environment, the levels of stress, because of course really interesting when people are suffering from stress, they revert to their personality type and perhaps lose some of the social cues that they have built over time. I think there's also something, and that you mentioned about Andy, about authenticity, that to me is really important to be real, because they've done some research that shows human beings can judge whether people are being authentic or not. You know, don't you? You know when you get onto an airliner and somebody smiles at the cabin crew as you get on and say welcome, and they really don't think that you're very welcome. Or when you go into a shop and somebody doesn't really want to help you, you know.
It's true.
And that's true in leadership. That's true in the teams that we're building. And for me, a really good leader knows when to let somebody else take the lead because they actually have the skills to do it. How do you empower the team that you're with to enable the most efficient team working and system? Because we can't do it all on our own. We need to be able to do it collaboratively and work together to get the diversity of thought, the diversity of the team and the skill set to be able to deliver the best possible in whatever we're doing.
It's like going away from that kind of top-down approach where you feel like a leader's there to distribute the tasks and the knowledge, but actually a leader's there to learn from their team to understand how we can better utilise the skills that they don't have. Like a good manager knows the skills that their team has that they don't. And actually, how can we get person X to do this in a way that I never could? And how could I learn from that?
Yeah. It's like this automatic feedback. Are we always learning? And you said, how do I take this from the military? And again, when we were flying a mission, you would plan, you would brief, you would fly the mission, you would debrief. And in that debrief, it would be continual, what went well, what could we have improved, what should we have done, and how do you take that into corporate world? So you're always trying to be the version of yourself that you could be next year. And if you're always striving to be better than you are, one of the things that I like to talk about is, when did you last practice an emergency stop?
Oh, that's going to worry me now.
That's a long pause,
I'm trying to think which pedal I do first. Yeah.
So I can't think actually when I might have done that.
But if that is something that might save our lives, why wouldn't we practice it? Why wouldn't that be something? And interestingly, if you think about simulators, you can just think about it. You can close your eyes and go through the motions, and you will now be milliseconds faster than where you were. The more you practice it in your head, the quicker that you'll be. Yes, it would be great to do one in real life as well in a safe environment. So again, in life, how are we improving who we are when we think about being a high performer and building teams that do the same? That level of authenticity and honest conversations and feedback that that people aren't taking offence to, but actually being curious about and thinking, oh yes, how can I learn? What does that mean?
Yeah. Is there a certain type of quality or characteristics that you know when you meet a team that they are going to be maybe more open to change or to listen to feedback that you mentioned there? Does anything stand out when you...
Not really. I think
Okay.
honesty. I think because what I love about teams is people being different. So I really
Right.
like to build teams who have some really quite, I call them spiky people.
Spiky people?
Yeah,
Right.
I love spiky people. Do you know what I mean by
Yeah,
spiky
I know.
people?
Yeah, I do what you mean. People who, we talked about it before, like sometimes you come into work and you feel like you have to be a certain type of person. And you do. I think you psychologically put yourself in that space. The spiky ones are those, I guess, who aren't afraid to be them, that authenticity, I guess.
I see.
And
Okay.
allow that shape the culture in some creative direction. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not just fitting in.
Yeah.
They're just them, but that spikes out in the map of the whole organisation. And I think, again, because we talk about diversity, there's a wonderful book called A Peacock in the Land of the Penguins, and I don't know if you've ever read it. It's a very short read, and it's about diversity, and some penguins go to a far-off land and they see this peacock and they think, wow, please come and work for our organisation. But when the peacock arrives, he doesn't think he should flash his feathers, and in the end the penguins are like, I think you should put a penguin suit on because you're being too different.
Yeah.
And it's a really good reflection on how do we enable people to be who they are in our organisations rather than trying to get them to be something different, that we all become penguins in one penguin suit.
How do you think an organisation can encourage that cultural acceptance?
Has to be shown by leadership, has to be role modelled. Because again, let's use as an example when we say we encourage mistakes, we encourage people to be innovative, yet what happens is we reward people who only get it right and we penalise people. So actions speak louder than words, and that impact of the behaviour of the role models and the leaders and what people watch. I'm going to go back to driving. I love this as an analogy. Our children learn to drive from when they're very young, watching us. People in organisations are learning from what they watch. What are they absorbing as they move up in an organisation, and what's acceptable and what's not.
Interesting. One of the points you made there was about... sorry, Andy, you mentioned it earlier. You made a point about taking a step back now.
The performance, or high performance?
High performance. It was. This was it. The recognition. So where you recognise people where they've done the positive, they've made a good impact, but we don't necessarily highlight the learnings. I wondered, how important is it that that's shared outside of a team, maybe, or maybe outside of between the leader and the employee? Is that something important to be doing?
I think it totally depends on the environment. The level of risk, the level of security and safety about what you're doing. Because again, I've worked in environments where you can't share anything that you're talking about and doing. So it would very much be in one area. Though, how do you take the information though, if it's important? What's the mechanism through which you could share that more broadly? Whether it's anonymously, because I do think you have to look after and care about the psyche of an individual, because most people feel quite vulnerable at different stages of their life. Vulnerable in the workplace about what people think about them, whether people are going to laugh at them.
Right.
And how do we build and nurture and encourage so that, and I'm not so convinced about psychological safety all the time, because actually if we're always safe, are we stretching ourselves out of our comfort zone?
Right.
There needs to be a level at which, if we're really going to be stretching, which is done in a way though, which is within the values of the organisation, which is looking after and caring for people, and just allows us to stretch ourselves and become a bit more again, because that's where we learn.
You've answered my question that I was about to ask, which is brilliant, because I was going to talk about vulnerability and the fact that your experience in different sectors and industries, you're going to see people in quite maybe extreme vulnerable scenarios under a lot of pressure, which I assume there are analogies of which you can put into a work experience. And I was going to ask you, how can you use your experience in maybe some often extreme environments into a workspace where you can support employees to be more vulnerable, but and then use that to get the most out of them, but also feel supported. suppose that goes back to the point you've just raised. But
again, the role modelling is really important in what sets the scene for the types of conversation that you're having and that you're willing to have. Because if you remain at a surface level, everything's going to remain at a surface level. And my belief in the difference between a high-performing team and a performing team is that emotional connection, that emotional link that you have. Because in some ways we're quite tribal still, whether we live in a village, whether it's the biggest village of the United Kingdom or not. But actually there's something about our village and our town, or what the equivalent of that is within an organisation.
And if you don't mind me asking, so I did a bit of research myself about you, but you mentioned the Ted Lasso leadership style, and I wonder if we could take, if you don't mind, a bit of a dive into that. What is it that caught your attention about that methodology, really?
I think the very first one, where Ted Lasso walks in and he asks what the problems are, and the showers didn't work. I don't know if you've watched Ted Lasso.
Yes.
And he fixed the shower. That is just the simplest and truest analogy, that it doesn't matter what you're doing in an organisation. If there's something fundamentally missing, that is what people are talking about and complaining about and is impacting on them every day, why not ask them and fix it? Because that is listening, and that is showing care and feeling valued. And I think we all want to be valued. We all want to feel that people in the workplace care about us, and that we're not coming to do a transactional piece, because that's very different. I am a great believer, and I'll just put this in the context of the conversation that we're having, is that if you can work and live your purpose together, then it's so much more fulfilling than if you feel that your purpose is missing, because I just think you have something missing in your gut when you turn up to work.
Definitely. And we spoke about the way that the world of work is changing and transforming, and I think we're right in saying that it's transferring more into, companies want their employees to be engaged. They want work to not just be work, like say it's not just a transactional job anymore. It's a place that you go and socialise, it's a place that you learn, you grow. Have you seen that change for yourself and the role that you come into corporate world? Have you seen that that's been changing?
I think I was involved in well-being. I've just walked around, really interesting. And it was about 9 years ago, and I was saying about how important well-being was. I'd written a couple of books on the personal energy and how important it is to recognise your own personal energy and how you bring it. And I remember somebody saying to me, well-being, nobody's interested in well-being.
All right, okay.
And I walk around today and everybody's interested in well-being.
Yes.
So absolutely, things have shifted and moved to recognise the employee, from decades ago when I first started working, where again it was all about the sort of structure and hierarchy, and
right.
I won't start to talk about sort of management theory, but again, things are different, and I think our young people are now expecting something different, and if they are not receiving that, then we'll be looking elsewhere.
Interesting.
It's really interesting to hear that from you. We just talked earlier this morning about communication, and the reason that if you don't communicate, you don't address well-being, so people leave. We'll be talking about mental health later and why that's important, and it's why it's expected by a Gen Z culture, women in the workforce. That's a standard. If you don't have that, we will leave. So it's really good to get your view on that.
Yeah. I wondered actually, how much of a drive do you think it comes from, like we mentioned it with the Gen Z coming into the workplace, how much do you think is driven from them, and how much do you think can be driven at business level, like say from the hierarchy?
I think it's a sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I think it's a bit of what came first, chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
Because again, organisations are just human beings that are moving through with different experiences. And there is a cultural norm. Again, it depends who we're promoting into those positions and what we're basing those decisions of recruitment and promotion on as to what you're going to get as an organisation. I don't know if you know, I'm a trustee in your research. I'm a trustee at the Royal Air Force Club, and I've absolutely loved it. I'm in my final year, and I did watch last night the Bake Off the Professionals, where we have our chef and our pastry chef, who are one of the teams on it. Absolutely, I felt so proud watching them. And we had a lunch at the club yesterday where I saw them both.
Okay.
And I was sitting next to a young lady who does our social media, Jemima, and I said to her, "Do you love working here?" She went, "I absolutely love it." And they love it. People love working there because of the environment that's been built, that feeling of belonging, the voice that they have. You know, yes, they may work hard. Yes, there may be frustrations because, you know, that's just the same as family life, isn't it? You
Yes,
know, nothing's perfect and nothing ever will be. But how do we deal with that and overcome? And how do we have a really great organisation that we want to go to work in the morning? And I love working and I want to feel that joy when I get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, definitely. It's been brilliant, all those topics we spoke about. But what I thought would be quite nice to wrap up this whole conversation we've had, because we spoke about many different subjects there, but we spoke about high performing teams, and that's what we're looking towards, and how do businesses move forward, empower, build to stronger positions. If I could ask you to summarise maybe 3 key points for businesses to be looking at to empower their teams, to have high performance teams, what would you advise for them?
Be relentless about your leadership, because I think we used to talk about leadership a lot, we used to focus on it. I feel that we're now at a place that we have drifted away a bit. We've moved a bit more to management and less about leadership. What does it mean to have a great leader who is going to inspire and build and nurture that team? And that is absolutely critical. I think the second thing is to recognise that there are leaders throughout the organisation. It's not always the ones that have been promoted. So again, how do you spot the talent and encourage them and give them a voice, because they're going to bring people along with them at the same time. And then that third one's got to be about authenticity, about encouraging people to give real feedback in the moment. That's encouraged, that is also built in a culture of being able to receive that feedback in the right way. So it's not conflict, but it's about improvement. Because if you're truly talking about a high-performing team, just go and watch the videos of the Red Arrows. They are every single day debriefing and criticising in a constructive way their behaviours, their actions and others in a way which is just built upon to say, how do we become better? How do we practice our emergency stop? How do we become the version of ourselves that we could be next week, next month, next year?
That's brilliant. It's really fascinating to hearing how you've taken your learnings from the aviation and the RAF all the way through now to coaching others and building that leadership style. But what's most important, I think, for businesses is to reflect. It really sounds like that's the ultimate piece. It's like I say, the authenticity, that people need to be honest, that they need to have the opportunity to communicate, which is a point that Andy and I talk a lot about in our podcast. But what I find really interesting is what you've been able to do is you've been able to take kind of your experience and adapt it to a workplace, which I think really goes to show it doesn't matter what background you have. We're all actually trying to achieve the same thing, which is we're trying to be better, we're trying to become more efficient and empowered, but ultimately it has to be driven not just from the individual, but I think letting organisations have that opportunity and leverage that for employees.
I also feel like we've answered what a spiky person is.
Yeah.
As an authentic leader who's open to change and criticism, who's going to practice their emergency stop, but also lead from any level, right?
Yeah, and
I love that.
Yeah. And I love the mention of the peacock as well. I don't think that's brought up enough, really, that it's okay to be yourself, that I know that diversity and inclusion is a very important point in companies now, they're now reporting on it, but actually, human to human, it sounds like, you're saying that actually it's okay to be yourself, that you want diversity in your teams, you want people to be themselves, to show what they've got. So it's been really interesting. Thank you ever so much for joining us on, I would say, conversations from the couch, but conversations from our chairs.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
We really appreciate your time. please stick around. We'll put some things out on our social, give you a few more quick questions. We could honestly talk to you all day, and I want to talk to you more about penguins, peacocks and spiky people. So we're going to do that. But yeah, follow us for the rest of the day. We'll have a few more videos like this. But for now, thank you, Jo, so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.